If you told me I get obsessed with a book about two older women who live together and argue with each other, I feel like you just would have described my TV viewing habits. Hello and welcome back to my channel, Read Good, Draw Bad, where we love to read really good and draw pretty darn bad. Today we are going to the old-timey town of Bursley in good old England, where we will be discovering the book The Old Wives' Tale by Arnold Bennett. Now, just so you know, I'm doing a reading challenge where I'm reading the top 100 novels of the 20th century as decided by the Modern Library. You can find more information in the description below. First, a TLDR on this wonderful book. This book is broken into 4 parts. In the first part, we discover the lives of 2 young women, Constance and Sophia Baines, growing up in their parents' draper shop. They own this shop and they also work there. In part 1, we follow the family life of the 2 main characters while taking care of their bedridden father and trying their best to ignore the nagging of their extremely overprotective mother. And if you thought this was going to be a boring plot, I need to tell you this book loves plot twists, so get ready. Because the one time that Sophia leaves her ill father just to go say hello to a boy, her father immediately dies. And because Sophia can't live with the shame of being found with a boy, especially in a smaller town where everyone talks, and the shame of letting her father die, she flees the city with her newfound lover all the way to Paris. And did I mention that her new lover is a traveling salesman? If this sounds like a bad country song, you know this love story is not going to turn out very well. Part 1 of the book ends with Sophia's shocking decisions of deciding to run away with said traveling salesman, and then we follow Constance in part 2 of the book. In Constance's perspective in part 2, we follow after Sophia has left town and she is now caring for her aging mother and her newly married husband, Mr. Povey, who is one of the young men who used to work in the draper shop and who will eventually take over the family business. Since, you know, of course, women don't own property and stuff. Not in this time period anyway. Constance Baines, as her namesake goes, is the constant one and is a very loving character throughout this book. And she takes care of her husband and her one young son, who she adores and spoils endlessly. This would be the equivalent of a young woman trying to live a very healthy middle-class life while running a local business in a small town. Now, in part 3, we get back to the explosive events that started a really long time ago if you've read this book, and we follow Sophia's perspective as she follows her traveling salesman lover to Paris. Now, it's important to note that this book starts around 1840 and concludes around 1904, because part of what happens in this book includes a lot of world events that end up being really important to both Sophia and Constance. Now, Sophia, who thought Gerald Scales, the traveling salesman, was so handsome and dashing, finds out that he is a gambling addict and honestly kind of a creep. At this point, Sophia realizes she needs to discover her boss girl era. However, her new era is unfortunately interrupted by the siege on Paris by the Prussian, or German, army that then occupies Paris for quite a while. Instead of hanging out at cute clubs and becoming the business person she always thought she was going to be, Sophia is forced to live in near squalor until the siege of Paris ends. She must put up with living in Paris during wartime, which is about as romantic as you would imagine it would be. However, because of this crisis, Sophia becomes an excellent manager of her friends' apartments and eventually starts making a small amount of commerce on the black market while people are literally starving around her. And she takes this excellent managerial sense and business sense and eventually turns it into an Airbnb or a bed and breakfast. Yeah, I can't believe I said Airbnb. They didn't have Airbnbs. And because she managed those set of apartments, she eventually saves up enough food and money to be able to buy a property that she then uses as a hotel for wealthy British guests to come and visit Paris. And she makes quite a bit of money. However, as Sophia approaches middle age, she realizes that maybe working 12 hours a day, 7 days a week is not the life that she was trying to get for herself. And so, thinking that, she decides to sell the business to a wealthy businessman and take her money and move back to Bursley where her sister is, and it's like things are excellent between them again, even though they're adults and they've grown into very different people. At which point, the 2 sisters are reunited and they go on to live out the meaning of the title of the book, which is The Old Wives' Tale, with the 2 of them living together with their 2 extremely old elderly, ugly dogs. And these dogs are described in quite detail as some of the ugliest dogs you can imagine. The fourth section of this book is honestly the most heart-wrenching, and it's called What Life Is. And we follow the events leading to the death of Sophia and eventually the death of Constance. And at which point the book ends, because we followed these people's lives from nearly the start of when they were born to all the way when their lives end. Now, setting-wise, it's important to note that this is set in the fictional town Bursley, and to really understand what this book is about, you have to understand what kind of small town Bursley is. It's a place where industrious English folks live in a county called the Five Towns. And Bursley is modeled on a provincial English town that's sort of a hub of trade for a lot of other smaller places. Here's a quote of what the town was like. "It lies on the face of the county like an insignificant stain, like a dark Pleiades in a green and empty sky. And Hanbridge has the shape of a horse and its rider, Bursley of a half donkey, Nyip of a pair of trousers, Longshaw of an octopus, and Little Turnhill of a beetle. The Five Towns seem to cling together for safety. They are unique and indispensable because you cannot drink tea out of a teacup without the aid of the Five Towns, because you cannot eat a meal in decency without the aid of the Five Towns. For this architecture of the Five Towns is an architecture of ovens and chimneys. For this its atmosphere is as black as mud. A district capable of such gigantic manufacture, of such a perfect monopoly, and which finds energy also to produce coal and iron and great men, may be an insignificant stain on the county, considered geographically, but it is surely well justified in treating the county as his back garden once a week and in blindly ignoring it the rest of the time." So the people from Bursley are good English stock, but they can be quite bullheaded as well. It's a bit of a mocking tone of the superiority complex of a small town mindset where they produce so many good things, why would they ever need to look anywhere else? And if you've ever visited one of these kind of places, you know what I'm talking about. It's a very specific kind of mindset. Kind of reminds me of the town where Belle used to live in Beauty and the Beast. Nice people, but not completely against a pitchfork and a mob kind of situation. Now, thematically, this book is talking about what is the life of a woman, and what is the life of a woman coming from a small town who wants to make their life have some meaning during this time period. And the author chooses to explore it from two very different perspectives of one woman who chose her family life and another woman who chose her career. And in both cases, the pluses and minuses are explored in depth. Now, there's a big theme involving individual growth and change, because the girls who start out at the start of the book are hopeful and young and interesting, and by the end of the book, their personalities are completely different from where they started. This book asks the question, when we grow old and we make different choices, do we stay the same or do we become a different kind of person? I think you could argue it either way, but I think the author is trying to say that we remain true to our essential characteristics, but that various parts of ourselves might change depending on what we're forced to do throughout our lives. Because both of these characters grow out of their personal characteristics, Constance being the more family-oriented and more constant, and Sophia being the more wise or shrewd character, but even so we see both their positive sides as well as their flaws. Because being shrewd might mean you're also a little snappy with people, and if you are the more constant and loving one, you might be a wonderful person who's very grounded, but you might not be very adventurous. And you might be a bit shy to have a life of adventure that maybe you could have if you had been a little more of a risk taker. The last theme that I think is super important in this book is it discusses the changing role of women in English society because of the changes in history and technology throughout England. War, technology, and the changing opinions of people in Bursley means that what the women thought was the truth of their small town at the start of the book ends up looking very different by the end of the book, where it's 40 years later. Because this small town attitude really outlined what Constance and Sophia thought they were allowed to do in their lives and what they thought was permissible. And near the end of the book, both Constance and Sophia realized some of these small town ideals really blinded them to what was possible for them to live what they considered to be a good life. As Sophia notes near the end of the book, even though she had so many adventures, she still stayed within what was outlined as acceptable behavior for a woman in European society. Sophia is forced to work twice as hard as most of the men in this book because she also realizes, because of her past romance with Gerald Scales, that marrying the wrong man can ruin your life, and it almost ruined her life. Now, on to the review. This was a sleeper hit for me. I was not expecting to like this book as much as I did once I finished it. This book, for sure, if you can get back past the first boring description of Bursley in the first 20 pages or whatever it is, you will probably enjoy this book. You may be interested in an industrial small town and how it's described, but I've already been to Hamilton, Ontario. Thank you very much. These women are defined by their small town, by their roles, by the constraints of war and technology, and it's really quite a masterpiece. But the reason Arnold Bennett wrote this book was to comment on the life and the feelings of older women, which I find fascinating. There were many times when I read this book when I thought, I know this woman, I know who this woman is, and she's not even in my time period. And that to me is a sign of a great book, a book where you can recognize the people who are in that book, even though you don't know them and you don't have a lot in common with them. There are certain universal things that kind of call to you throughout great literature, and I think that's very true of this book. Now, here is the actual reason Arnold Bennett wrote this book. I'll just read the quote to you now. An old woman came into the restaurant to dine. She was fat, shapeless, ugly, and grotesque. She had a ridiculous voice and ridiculous gestures. It was easy to see that she lived alone and that the long lapse of years she had developed a kind of peculiarity which induces guffaws among the thoughtless. And I reflected, concerning the grotesque diner, this woman was once young, slim, perhaps beautiful, certainly free from these ridiculous mannerisms. Very probably she is unconscious of her singularities. Her case is a tragedy. One ought to be able to make a heartrending novel of the history of a woman such as she. Now, every woman is not grotesque, and far from it. I like this quote because it shows that Arnold was really thinking about the fact that a woman, or a man, or anyone really, is made up of a million different choices and changes, some in their control and some not. And then we have something that's presented to others that we don't even always understand ourselves. And I think he really accomplished what he set out to do, which is to explain what the inner life of this older woman might be like. The one thing I will say about this book is there are several very heartbreaking moments that I felt were very easy to understand because the author does not shy away from extreme injustice or the possibility of bad luck. One of the saddest moments for me is when Constance, as an older woman, becomes afraid to leave her house because she hasn't done it in so long. And also she's done the things the same way for too long, so anything new starts to frighten her. And as they get older, even though they were strong and capable in the middle of their lives, they begin to display behaviors and affections that would make them ridiculous to any casual viewer if they saw this behavior in public. The lesson of this book for me is definitely about sisterly love, even given how different the two women were. And both the younger and the older sister had an extreme love for each other, and it showed throughout the book, even though sometimes you think they love their dogs like a little too much. This book has beautiful writing, and I think it's very accessible to modern audiences. So if you enjoy long, sprawling novels that explain the intricacies of a woman's role in society, I think this could absolutely be the book for you. Okay, well, I'm gonna leave it there, but if you like this review, please like, share, and subscribe, or you can hit the bell notification to know when I release a new video. Do you have any comments about this particular book? Would you like to share with me? Or is there another book that you really enjoyed that this made you think of about the lives of women and their relationship with each other? Okay, well, I had so much fun talking about this book, and I feel like I could talk about this book for ages, but next time we will be moving into a very, very different kind of book, a swashbuckling adventure with a hint of colonialism and an undertone of homosexuality or maybe bisexuality. Lord Jim by Joseph Conrad. I hope you'll join me. It will be a very interesting discussion. Well, that's all for me this time. I hope things are going very well for you, and I hope you are getting some excellent reading done. And as always, stay curious, stay reading.